Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl Ilov, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. A question that I frequently get asked is that if I had known that it was going to take 10 years for me to earn my black belt, would I have done it? The answer is no. There was no way I wanted a black belt when I began my training. I didn't want a yellow belt. I didn't even want a white belt, let alone stick it out until I got to the level of black belt. It just wasn't something that I wanted to do. But how many times in life are we presented with an opportunity that we have absolutely no idea how it's going to turn out? We have no idea what to expect or how long it's going to take. How do you approach something like that? If somebody had told me I was going to be training for 10 years and then I would become my teacher's first female black belt, I would have laughed. I would have laughed long, loud, and hard. And then I would have told them that they were crazy and they might want to seek some professional help. But training works in a really funny way, and so does life. So we have opportunities or situations that present themselves to us, and we either have to give it all we've got or just walk away. We can try and do it with a half-baked attitude and kind of casual. And how does that work out? Have you ever done something that was presented to you and you had absolutely no idea where it was going to lead you, and you just gave it such an incredible commitment and effort, and there were many times maybe that you wanted to quit, but what kept you going? What was it deep inside of you that just made you keep on not looking at the goal or the end result, but just focusing on the process and the journey itself? And did you have to be honest with yourself and honest about where you were in that entire process? Because those are actually three of the traits of the ninja that we apply not only in our training, but when you think about it, it applies to each and every single one of us in everything that we do in life, no matter what it is. And that's pretty much how my journey as a martial artist began. And like I said, I didn't even want a white belt, but I got one because it came with the uniform. So all you had to do was pay a month tuition, sign the release form, you got your gi, of course you had to pay for that, and the white belt came along with it. And white belts are usually given to all beginning students. And the only requirement, like I said, that you need to earn it is just to sign the release form and hand them a check. And what a white belt symbolizes is a new life and a new start of a remarkable journey, and also the person's willingness to be open to learning a new way of thinking, moving, sensing, and feeling. And that is almost as if you're starting a brand new life, because technically you really are. And some schools will describe it as a birth, a beginning of maybe a seed being planted, and that the white belt student is a beginner searching for knowledge of the art. And the white belt is the beginning of that life cycle, and it represents the seed as it lies beneath the snow in the winter. I think that's a really eloquent way of putting it, but I have to be perfectly honest, that did not apply to me. And in some ways, in my own personal belief system, I think that the white belt is the hardest, because it requires a person to be open to a deeper understanding of themselves and to a journey that has no end. And most students, most people are thrilled beyond belief to take that first step and begin that remarkable journey. I was definitely not one of those students, but for some reason, I just kept going to class. I kept showing up. Half the time, I didn't even know why I was showing up, but at least 3 times a week, there I was in the dojo with with my little white belt. I didn't even know how to tie the belt. In my very first class, there actually was another woman there, and Sensei had already told me about her. He said, "Oh, the two of you are going to be great friends. I just know it. And she's also a dancer, so you've got an awful lot in common. And she just tested for her yellow belt last week, so she's a brand new yellow belt." And I thought, wow, a yellow belt. Somebody actually stuck around long enough to get their yellow belt, and she's a woman. And then I thought about, how he said that we were going to be great friends. And I already had enough friends in my life, but I didn't have any friends that were dancing ninjas. So I thought, well, that would be kind of nice. And also I figured that there would be another woman that I could kind of hang on to. She could maybe take me under her wing and teach me how the rules were, or the etiquette, or how to deal with this strange new world of men and martial arts. So the very first class I showed up and she was in the dressing room. So I said, "Oh, you must be so-and-so. Mark told me about you. I'm Cheryl." And I extended my hand, and she pointedly looked at my extended hand, ignored it, and walked out of the dressing room. And I thought, well, that didn't go very well, but whatever. And she came in a few minutes later, again, as I was struggling with my gi, trying to tie it and trying to figure it out. And I asked her to help me. I says, "How does this work? I have no idea. I've never done this before." And she says, "Don't ask me. I have no idea." And she walked out of the room again. Wow, really weird. I thought that was strange. And then she did come back a third time. And finally I tried again. I gave her my most winning smile. And I says, "Could you please help me tie my belt? I have no idea how to do this." And she said, "I don't even know how to tie my own," and walked out of the room again. From that moment, I decided that maybe we weren't going to be terrific friends the way that Sensei had predicted. So I didn't know what to do with the belt, so I just wrapped it around my waist and I let it hang down the side of my leg as if it were a skirt or a scarf like I would wear in ballet class. And I thought it worked rather nicely, and it gave a nice rakish look to the uniform. And besides, I kind of liked the way the ends of it would kind of bounce against my leg as I walked. When I walked onto the dojo floor, nobody said anything. Everybody did look. And eventually Mark walked over and he untied the belt and he showed me how to tie it. He tied it for me, and it was like, oh, okay. So for weeks, I did not know how to tie my belt. I couldn't figure it out, even though the guys would explain it over and over and over. For some reason, it absolutely confounded me, which is really funny because I thought to myself, here is a person that used to be responsible for life support equipment when I was a respiratory therapist, and I can't even figure out how to tie my own belt. And every class, Mark would come over, he would untie it for me and then tie it again. And I realized I didn't even have any incentive to try and learn how to tie my own belt, because if he was going to do it for me, why should I bother learning how to do it if he was going to do it for me? Besides, it was kind of nice. It was a nice moment when he would come over and untie my belt, and then he would wrap his arms around me as he would wind the belt around my waist a couple of times and then tie it. It was a really pleasant diversion from being hit, kicked, punched, thrown, and all kind of other diabolical things that were going to be done to me during class. So it was a nice moment to take that little brief respite and have somebody help me out and take care of me for a change, because that's not something that I was used to. And it's still even hard to this day to ask anybody for help. But if he was going to offer it, why should I learn how to tie my own belt? Eventually I did, but in the meantime, I was just enjoying those few moments of being spoiled. And now to circle back at the three traits, the three ninja traits that we actually have beaten into us, literally and figuratively, as new students, is to train with honesty, effort, and commitment. So those are the three things that I talked about even at the beginning of the podcast, because not only do these three things show up in our training, but how many times does it show up in life? As far as my training goes, when I learned as a brand new student those three traits of the ninja, the honesty, the effort, and the commitment, I have to say, as far as honesty goes, I honestly had no idea what I was doing there. And honestly, I was honestly confused most of the time, but I, again, just kept on showing up. And as far as effort is concerned, sometimes it just took all of my effort just to be able to tie my belt. And as far as commitment, I was committed, totally committed to surviving each and every class and making it out of the dojo in one piece so I could make my way home. So as far as the honesty, effort, and commitment, my own personal interpretation of it was a lot different from the other ninjas. And I told you about the one woman who wouldn't even help me tie my belt. Well, she wasn't around very long. She disappeared shortly after my first class. I like to think that maybe I had nothing to do with it, but who knows? There was another woman that I met probably a month or two later, and I had never seen her before because she typically would take the evening classes and I would take the daytime classes. And she wasn't very friendly either, and I just couldn't figure out what it was with all these ninjas. They just didn't seem to be very friendly. The men were, but the women just didn't seem to be. So she was there with a friend of hers in the dressing room when I came walking in, and once again I introduced myself, even though they had been deep in conversation about ninja secrets, and they both looked up and they grunted briefly and didn't even introduce themselves or tell me their names. And I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to go out into the dojo and try and figure out how to tie my own belt and give them some space. Well, they were both getting ready to test for their yellow belt. And since we were all three white belts, toward the end of class, one of the black belts gathered us together as a small group so we could review what was going on in our white belt level so the two women would be ready to test for their yellow belt the following week. And he looked at me and he says, I know you're new here, but this is really good information for you and it'll be really good practice for you for when you test for your yellow belt. And the one woman was kneeling next to me on the mat and she just kept glaring at me, giving me the stink eye. And I was casually just twirling my ponytail and I said, oh no, I'm never going to test. And she turned and looked at me and said, well, what's the point? And I said, well, there is no point. I often have no point. I'm just here to learn a few things. And she looked at me like I had just landed from another planet. And the black belt was very patient. And he says, well, we'll just review your bookwork. Bookwork? What is bookwork? Apparently, these people were so serious about their training, they actually had notebooks. And he handed me a sheet of paper that had all the techniques that I was going to be responsible for before I would be able to test for my yellow belt. And I politely accepted the piece of paper, even though I was thinking, well, that's never going to happen. So I did kind of play along, although it was really obvious that my heart was not in it. And every time I would just wave my hand in the air and say, oh, I just don't need to know that, that's okay, move on, the young lady kneeling next to me would just look at me like she was going to rip my head off, and I would just look at her very sweetly and smile and just, rearrange my ponytail and my little white belt. And I thought, who do you think you are? Well, after that class, I never saw her again. She and her friend did test for their yellow belts. They disappeared. I never saw them again. I'm sure that they were in the evening classes for a while, but she left the dojo shortly thereafter that. So I tried not to take it personally. I wasn't sure if I was the one that was scaring all of the other ninjas away, the female ninjas, or if they just couldn't stand the pressure of being around a middle-aged lady that was having hot flashes in the middle of class. I don't know. But the funny thing is, several years later, that same young lady did come back to the dojo, and she and I ended up being great friends, wonderful friends, training together, and actually I got my black belt shortly before she did, and I couldn't have done it without her help. And honestly, since we're talking about honesty, if she hadn't left the dojo to get that pesky little college degree, she would have been Mark's first female black belt. So I'm kind of glad that that college thing got in the way. But anyhow, it was just really funny and how we were white belts together and we just couldn't stand each other. But the funny thing is how we got to be such great friends. So you never can judge a book by its cover, and you never know that the person next to you giving you the stink eye is going to be one of your closest and dearest friends. So I thought that was an important lesson to learn. But there I was, still the lone white belt. And eventually, one of the guys did badger me into testing for my yellow belt. He said, look, you've been coming all the time for the past 3 months. You know all the material. You might as well test for your yellow belt. And I thought, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't want a yellow belt. I just want to stay here as a lowly white belt until I quit. And I was always planning on quitting really soon because, again, martial arts just wasn't my thing and it wasn't in my DNA. And I was always looking for the next ballet class, and why was I even there in the first place? And honestly, I do not know. But there was something about going to class and the way I felt, and it was something that I can't even describe, but I just kept showing up. And oftentimes we would get brand new students, and the first thing they said when they walked into the dojo was, I want to get my black belt. I'm here. I want to get my black belt. And that's why I'm taking classes, and I just want to get my black belt as soon as possible. And of course, I had no such illusions, or shall I say delusions, about such grandeur. I just wanted to get out in one piece every single class. And it's really funny, those people, and several of them were women that came in, and I kept looking for that one woman who would get that black belt. And they would just right away, I want that black belt, that's all I'm here for. And they would just last for a few weeks. And our training program, the way that our school was run, it did take several years to earn a black belt, even if somebody had applied themselves and went to the dojo every single day and was very meticulous about it and practiced all the time and trained constantly. It would still take a minimum of 6 to 8 years in our art and in the federation that I was in. And I really have to admire that, because what they were expecting of us and the level of training, the level of commitment and effort and honesty that they expected from us was really a very high bar. Well, eventually I did test for my yellow belt, even though it almost killed me. I was on the mat for probably about 25 minutes, and I was just exhausted. I was spent, and it was just mental and physical, and it really took everything I had, and it took everything out of me. And I thought, well, for some reason I didn't even think about it as being proud of myself. I just did it. And then the next day when I went back to class, and all of the guys were making such a big fuss out of it, I can't believe it. Look at you, you've got your yellow belt. And I got so many congratulations. And I said, oh, it really isn't that big of a deal. But I couldn't help but giggle every time I looked at that belt. I thought, wow, I really did this. I got a yellow belt. But as I said, I got so many congratulations and even one mazel tov. And I thought that was really pretty cool. Everybody was very sweet and supportive. But that was as far as this journey was going to go. And about 3 months later, the same guy badgered me again into testing for my second degree yellow belt. Who was that masked man anyway? He kept showing up and badgering me and pushing me to test. So I did. I tested for my second degree yellow belt. And then a funny thing happened. When it came time about 3 months later, nobody had to badger me to test. Nobody had to push me into it. It was my own idea. And I was the one that approached Mark and said, I want to sign up and test for my orange belt. And he about fell over. He couldn't believe it. So I did. I tested for my orange belt. And the funny thing is, I can admit this to you now, I cried after my first 2 tests. Not the boo-hoo, boo-hoo, in a really big sobbing type of crying. And I, of course, didn't do it in the dojo. Oh, my goodness, I would never do it in the dojo. I would never cry in front of anybody anyhow if I can help it, but especially not in the dojo. But as soon as I would get to my car with my brand new belt in my hand, my yellow belt, and then my bumblebee, my yellow belt with the black stripe, I would just sit there in my car and I would tear up. And even a few tears would manage to slip out of my eyes and down my face. And I thought, wow, that's really weird. What's up with this? Because it wasn't like I really cared about climbing up through the ranks, but there was something about it of just having accomplished something like that, especially for a woman who was thinking she was just going to be at the dojo for a few weeks, learn a few self-defense techniques and check it off her list and then move on with her life. And there I was, a second degree yellow belt. So by the time I tested for my orange belt, and by the way, you might want to know I rocked the test, and I got my new belt, and I was holding my belt in my hand. I walked to my car and I got behind the wheel, and I sat there for a few moments and I waited for the tears to come. And they didn't. And I thought, what's going on here? So I waited a few more minutes, just kind of tapping my feet, waiting for the tears to come. And nothing happened. And then I got an epiphany. It was one of those head-smacking moments. And I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and I said, you don't have to cry. You can go and buy something pretty instead. So that was the first time I celebrated one of my belts by driving to the mall, and I bought myself a sexy little sundress, and it was awesome. When I went back to the dojo the next day and I got my congratulations and my mazel tov and everybody just oohing and awing over my orange belt, and they were so proud of me. It was really cute. I was kind of like their mascot for a long time, this cute little middle-aged ballerina hanging out, and now she's starting to climb up through the ranks. It was really funny. And I finally admitted to the guys that I did cry after my first 2 tests. And they just looked at me and I said, not the big boo-hoo type of thing. I said, but I did. I got very emotional. I teared up. But when I got this belt, I decided that crying just really wasn't very ninja-like behavior. So I went to the mall and bought myself a pretty little sundress instead. And one of the guys said, "Oh, like that's really ninja behavior." And Mark said, "Oh, yes, it is." And he grabbed me by the back of the gi and set me in front of the other ninja and said, "Because you wouldn't expect a pretty little thing like that to beat you up now, would you?" So we all got a really good laugh out of that. And from that moment on, every single time I tested, I went shopping and bought myself something really pretty or sexy. So that was one of my rituals. I had several others that I developed as time went on, but that was my favorite. And the rest, as they say, is history. And that started the upward climb. And again, I never had my eye on the black belt. I never had my eye on anything. The only thing I really had my eye on was the very next level, when they would hand me the sheets of paper that would list the techniques and the greetings and the philosophy and the bookwork, whatever I would be responsible for the next level. And I never looked past that level. I just applied myself. I showed up for class. I really focused on that level. I gave it my all. I gave it all the effort I had, and I really committed myself to learning that material. And I was honest with myself. I had to really be able to understand my limitations, what my strengths were, and what my weaknesses were, what was coming to me naturally, which was very little, by the way, and what I really had to struggle with. And that's what we have to do in every life challenge that we're faced with, regardless of what it is. If it's with business, if it's with relationships, finances, health, anything that we're having to work on or struggle with, everything is a journey, and it does take time to just focus on the moment, focus on the here and now, not looking at the end result, because you never know. Your end result might be a whole lot higher than you ever aimed for. I do have a habit of aiming low, and not just in the dojo, if you know what I mean, but you just need to apply yourself and use those traits of honesty, knowing when to stop, knowing when to push harder, knowing when to slow down, knowing when to change gears, because sometimes if you keep hitting up against a brick wall and you keep banging your head up against it, as we all know what the definition of insanity is, doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. So you have to look for the other pathways that you can take to get back on track, back on your journey, and to have the sense of fulfillment that you have as you're going through this process. Again, not looking at the end result, because, as I said, you may surprise yourself. Not having a specific goal or a specific outcome planned is something that I know a lot of business coaches would absolutely cringe at, because all the books that I've read and all the seminars that I've gone to is you have got to have a specific goal, and you've got to have a specific date, and you've got to have a specific plan. But I'm not a business expert. I'm a ninja, and this is what worked for me, and it has worked for me many times in a lot of other different life situations, especially the ones that have been particularly challenging or difficult. If you're faced with something that is so big or so challenging or overwhelming, just focus on one step. Take that first step and move very slowly, one step at a time, going through the journey so it's easier for you to maneuver your way through it. It's just like that white belt. That white belt represents those first steps, taking that first step into a new journey that you really don't know how it's going to turn out or what will develop for you. But if you can just focus on one step at a time, keeping an open mind, and just stay in the process, you might surprise yourself at what you may be able to accomplish. And if you ever do feel really overwhelmed, just imagine yourself tying that imaginary white belt around your waist, giving you the power and the incentive to continue to take those first steps and follow the journey wherever it takes you. You know, there are so many different descriptions that I've heard about what the white belt is and what the white belt means. And one of my favorite is that what you think your belt means is that it is the beginning of a journey of self-discovery that will test the limits of your mind, body, and spirit. And that really is true. That the white belt is representing that you are a blank slate. Now, that's true too. And that you're ready to be molded into a lean, mean fighting machine. Well, I would take issues with that. But what your belt actually means is that your pants won't fall and your uniform won't flap open while you're training. So wearing a white belt means that you have the strength to pull off some sort of knot. I couldn't even do that. I couldn't even do the knot. So it's amazing what you can accomplish when you just focus on putting one step in front of the other. When you think about it, what is the difference between a white belt and a black belt? Really, there isn't that much of a difference, except a black belt knows how to cover their mistakes. A black belt will have the finesse, the poise, and the composure to continue moving on even if they've made an incredibly bad blunder. But in a white belt, they pretty much broadcast to everybody when they make a mistake. So that's one of the things that really does differentiate a white belt from a black belt. It's not that we're that much more of an expert at what we're doing. We just know how to cover our mistakes a lot better, which is another valuable life skill. I'm not saying that we don't admit our mistakes, but when we're in the moment, when we're in the action, we don't let our mistakes show. We keep on going as if whatever happened was exactly what we wanted to happen and exactly what we had planned. Another difference is the level of expectation. As you start climbing up the ranks and you're getting close to that black belt, you are expected to perform at a much higher level. And it's really interesting what they demanded of me in the dojo, what sensei and the upper levels, the black belt instructors, expected of me was a lot more of what they expected and what they demanded of other students who were even at my level. I picked up on this probably at the level of my green belt when I realized that sensei was really demanding so much more of me than he was out of the other students. And of course, I naturally figured out that must be because I'm a woman. And I started paying closer attention just to make sure that I wasn't imagining it or that I wasn't paranoid. And I even asked one of the guys, I said, it seems like sensei is testing me at a much higher level than he's testing the guys. And he says, well, yeah, of course, because, and I said, because I'm a woman, right? And he said, no, because he just demands more of you because he knows you can do it. He says, you know a lot more and you move a lot better than a lot of the other students. So why wouldn't he test you at a higher level? And I thought, I still think it's because I'm a woman. So eventually I finally challenged sensei and I told him, I said, I think you are testing me at a much higher level than the other students. And he said, yes, I am. Well, I was surprised. I didn't think he would admit it. And then I said, and I think it's because I'm a woman. And he said, yeah, of course it is. And that wasn't the answer I was expecting either. So I just looked at him a little dumbfounded. And finally he told me, he said, those guys have something else that they can rely on. If their techniques fail them, if something goes wrong, they have their power. They have their strength, physical strength that they can rely on. You can't. Not with your size and your structure. If something went terribly wrong, you would be in really deep trouble. So you have to be better than them. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to take each and every one of them down. And, how do you argue with that kind of philosophy? In some bizarre and twisted way, I really thought it was kind of sweet that he would be looking out for me in that way. And it also kind of gave me a little boost of confidence that he was holding me to a higher standard, but the reason for doing it, how could I argue with that? So the take-home message is just keep moving, putting one foot in front of the other. Put that imaginary white belt around your middle if you need to. Even if you don't know how to tie the knot, that's okay. It might give you a little bit more confidence to keep going and use those traits of the ninja, the honesty, the effort, and the commitment to help get you through and help you move forward with whatever it is that you're dealing with or whatever you want to accomplish. If you know of some somebody else who is struggling, maybe you can give them a hand and cheer them on. Maybe give a girl or a guy a hand if they need it. If you need to wrap your arms around them and help them tie their belt, it's a little act of kindness and compassion that really does go a long way. I know I would have appreciated it when I needed it. And also, if someone gives you the stink eye the very first time that you meet them, don't worry about it. You might be surprised. Even though it looks like you have nothing in common, once you get to know each other, you might end up being best friends forever, not only on the mat, but off the mat as well. So in training and in life. But that's what life is anyway, isn't it? It's just a great big training session. And the more partners we have that we can work with and that can support us and we can support them, the journey becomes a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable as well. And it's also important to remember to celebrate your accomplishments. There was one young man at the dojo that I worked with for a few years, and he was a really nice young man. All he ever wanted was to get his black belt. It was a goal that he had set for himself, and he wanted it so badly, but quite honestly, he really wasn't very good. His techniques were sloppy and downright scary. During one of his tests, he had my training partner, as his uke, so that was the person who was attacking him, and he would beat her up. And at one point, he had her up in the air and literally dropped her on her head. The fact that she was just such a well-trained martial artist is the only thing that saved her, because she was able to somehow, before she landed, get into a tuck and roll so she didn't land on her head. But I couldn't believe that he did that. And most of all, I couldn't believe that they let him pass the test and gave him his brown belt. He eventually did quit training, and he told me one time that he felt like a failure because he never did make it to his black belt. I had to remind him to really celebrate how far he had come and how much he really had accomplished along the way, because he did come a really long way and he did accomplish a lot. So celebrate each and every accomplishment, each and every milestone that you do accomplish, because that will give you the energy to keep on going rather than looking at seeing how much farther you might have to go. So again, just celebrate each and every small step, taking those steps, because that is the way of the FemiNinja. Keep moving, keep taking those first steps, and I'll see you next time. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.